For this part, I want to make a couple of updates to the inside level and add a few minor fixes. There is no theory for this part, let's jump right in. Once again, back in Godot. There is, first of all, the main issue that we have a single crate and we have one toilet. But we want to have multiple of them and also not in this position. As a consequence, let me get rid of both of them. On top of that, I realized that the toilet is a bit too large, which we can fix quite easily with transform. I'm going to set it to a size of 80%, and that way we should have a much more realistic proportioned toilet. Also, we have to update the collision shape, and that's feeling better. That isn't actually the issue I wanted to work on first. But basically, for the most part, we are going to work inside of the inside level, and in there, I want to add a whole lot more static objects. For example, in there, we would have the bed, we would have the item containers, we would have the toilet, and on top of that, I am also going to add a few additional things. But that's going to come later, so let me go back to the outside level. Because if I run the game and I go to the outside house, there is one thing that doesn't work right now. If I enter the house, the camera tween is not working anymore. The reason for that is that we have the house inside of the ground somewhere there. And this house is sending a signal. We have player entered and player exited. But those we originally connected to the level node. Which means in there we have on house player entered and on house player exited. But this shouldn't be inside of the parent level, it should be in the outside level. I have to reconnect both of these signals. Although, first of all, inside of the level, I want to cut out these two functions because they are not working and not needed anyway. With that, we can work inside of the outside.gd script and connect the signal for on house player entered, and on top of that, also player exited. And now let me extend this script and paste in what I have cut out earlier. The actual tweens do not change, so I can literally just copy, cut, and paste them into the appropriate function, and we should be good to go. These other functions should be deleted. Also, I can get rid of tween parallels and the comment. And with that, we should have the previous functionality. Let's try. I can now once again walk to the house, and if we are entering, we are back to a working camera transition. So this is feeling much better. Also, the code is much more organized, because these two functions should only be available inside of the outside level. It wouldn't make sense to have them inside of the parent class, because they are not needed there. And that covers another super important part. Next up, I think I have realized there's another issue. And that is that we don't need these functions anymore. So UI update grenade text is not needed because we're doing all of that via the global script anyway. Which means I should be able to get rid of all of that. And the game should still work just as before. And that is looking pretty good. Cool. Now all of this is looking significantly cleaner. That means we can come to the actual important part of this section. I want to flesh out the inside level. For that, I'm going to hide the directional light so we can see a bit better what's going on. In here, I mostly want to work inside of the ground and then add a few more objects. For example, we have a bed that we could be adding. That one is spawned in the center. And also, I want to lock every other scene that we don't need. So items we don't need. And with that, we should be able to select just the bed and then place it in wherever we want to have it. Also, we can duplicate it and place it in a couple of positions where it could fit well. Yes, one there with a transform of 180, and then duplicate it one more time and place it somewhere here. And the same thing we can do for the other room. Something like this. And once again, this is going to be a fairly boring process. I am not going to add too much, but in your own game, play around with this a lot. Besides that, what I also want to add, and this is much more important, I want to add the crate, and I want to add the toilet. And I guess before we use the toilet, let me compare to the player, and I think that's a reasonably sized toilet. Maybe still a tiny bit large, but it's doable. This toilet I now want to place into certain positions. Let's say we can put one roughly here. I think for a real game, you would want to create an actual bathroom, but I'm not too concerned. Let's say we can put one there. This would be minus 90, actually just 90. And a similar one for the other room. And besides that, I also want to work with the crate. And on this one, we have to check where the front is. So this part is the front of the crate. It's a tiny bit hard to see. But this one, I want to place, let's say, here. Then I can place another one there. And since the player is going to need lots of ammunition, you do want to have quite a few of them. I guess we could put one there-ish. Then another one could be here, and this one I do want to rotate by 180 degrees. Then we can copy it again and place a couple all the way in the bottom of this room. Let's do one more time with a bit more rotation. So this one should have a rotation of 90 degrees, and we can place it here. Later on, I am probably going to add lots of enemies, so it's a bit more difficult to reach this area. So let's do one more crate here. And that should be quite a bit of stuff. I guess I should minimize things, and there is one item that shouldn't be there. This item I want to get rid of right away. I think same in the outside level, there we have one item that shouldn't be here. So let's get rid of it. And now I can try all of this. The outside level is still looking just fine, so I can go inside and we should be seeing the crates. And if we shoot at it, we are getting the items. We also have the bed, and collisions also still work. Toilet is also good. Cool. Next up, in the inside level, we also can add inside of ground the steam vents. So the particle thingy that I worked on earlier. And this one, I just want to place in a couple of positions, so it's not getting too annoying. I guess we can put one here-ish, and then another one there, and third one here. It doesn't really matter for this tutorial, but obviously, the more time you spend on this kind of work, the more realistic your game is going to feel and look. I guess here works. Once again, let's try all of this. And if I go inside, we have steam vents, and collision is also working. And once again, this is feeling quite nice. Notice here also that none of these objects I have added, the steam vents, the beds, the toilets, they don't interact with the light whatsoever, meaning I could place them here and nothing would happen. That is by design. The more objects you make interactive with light, the more of a performance hit you are going to suffer. So you want to be careful with that. And these steam vents don't really need light. Alright, with that, we are nearly done. There's just one more thing that I do want to add. Inside of level, I want to add another node 2D, and this one has to be below the ground. I call this one decals. Although right now this wouldn't do anything. What this one is going to get if I work inside of the, let's say, inside level, in graphics, we have decals, and there we have brushes, moss, blood, ceiling holes, and some random stuff. Most importantly, inside of brushes, we have lots of random brushes, and those we could use to add some dirt on top of the tile map. Although right now, if I minimized the ground, we have decals 2D, and if I add a sprite in there and add a texture, it wouldn't be visible because it is below the tile map. so what could we do about that? And there are two solutions. Either you could take the sprite 2D and the tile map and simply drag them in the scene tree before the decals node 2D. That way we could see this one once again. But that's not exactly what I want to do, because that would clutter up the scene. I want to have all of this a bit more organized. Instead, I want to do something else. If I have, for example, this sprite 2D selected, and as a reminder, this is the background dirt graphic. So this we absolutely have to have in the background as the deepest layer. Everything else has to come on top of that one. To ensure that, you can look inside of the inspector. We have another tab called ordering. And there you have a Z index. A Z index in a 2D game determines what is drawn on top of each other. Right now, every object we have ever worked with has a Z index of 0. However, if I increase this for the ground by 1, the ground is on top of everything else except the lights are getting a bit weird. This number can also go negative, so now the Z index for the ground is -1, and every other object has a Z index of 0, which means that the ground will always be below everything else. So in this case, what we could be doing is set the Z index for the ground to -2 and for the tile map to -1. And that way, we can once again see the decals again. The advantage of that solution is that now the game is much more organized. Or at least reasonably more organized. You can tell that this scene is getting quite busy, because we have quite a few nodes in there, and well, it's becoming a proper game. It's still quite small, but you get the idea. Although right now, what I want to do is I want to lock the items and the ground, make sure I can't select any children for the ground. Now I can work inside of decals and move stuff around. And those are simply a couple of graphics that I want to modulate. So they are looking dark and green. It should be much darker and a bit less green and a bit less transparent. And now we have a graphic that gives the entire thing a bit more texture. So we could put this, for example, there. Could scale it up. And now if I run the game and go inside again, you can see this is feeling much better. And for some reason in the outside level, the gate has disappeared. Although if I hide the ground nodes, we can see it again, which means something went wrong here with the Z index. We can fix that by increasing the Z index by 1. Not quite sure what happened here, but well, it's working for now. Anyway, I want to work inside of the inside level and duplicate the decals, and while we're doing that, I want to make everything else invisible so it's not getting distracting. I guess we can put one more of those here and then another one. You can also rotate it or scale it up, although you do have to be quite careful with that. But basically just take a couple of them and then move them around. Next up, I want to add another sprite 2D with a different kind of brush. Doesn't really matter which one it is. This one also has to get visibility, modulate, much darker, greenish and less transparency, and definitely more dark, and I guess a bit less transparency. And there we have another one. And pretty much all you want to do is add lots of those all over the game so that the base actually looks like it was infested by some random bugs and aliens. I am probably going to add quite a few more and speed the entire thing up. That way you don't have to watch me do this for 5 minutes. All right, with that, we have added quite a bit. So the last thing we have to do is to make everything else visible again. And now let's try the game. And there we can see that this is feeling significantly better. Now the game doesn't look as clean anymore, and we have a lot more texture to it. So this is feeling a lot more scary, and everything else is still working perfectly fine. Cool. I am quite happy with this. Although there's one issue I've just noticed. In the outside level, if I run all of this again, and notice when I am entering the gate, the player is now below the house. This is because the gate now has a z-index of 1, but the player has a z-index of 0. Because of that, the gate is always on top of the player. Now, in my case, I'm going to set the z-index for the player to 2 and call it a day. For a real game, you probably want to have a bit more of planning in terms of what layer gets what z-index. Otherwise, you can get quite lost with this one, and it might get a bit annoying. But now, if I'm trying this again, this is much better. Now, there's one more thing that I do want to do inside of the inside level, and for that, I want to hide the other stuff again. We now have lots of stuff for the ground, but on top of that, especially for this area, I want to add a bit of infestation. And for that, once again, inside of the parent level, I want to add another node 2D. And this node 2D, I'm going to call infestation. This infestation is going to be right next to the ground. And basically what this one is going to be, if I work inside of the inside level, we have infestation, and it's there. If you look under, I think it is under objects, and there we have infestation. There we have a corner, large, line, stuff like that. I basically want to take all of them and drag them into this area. And now we have added them to the parent node, so let's move them to their proper place, infestation. Also, I want to lock the decals so they're not getting in the way. Inside of infestation now, we have all of these random objects that look like, let me break them apart. All of these are random infestations that give the level once again a bit more detail. And those I just have to place in the proper way. For example, this one would be a corner piece, more or less. So I can place it roughly here. Doesn't have to be perfect, but once again, the more time you spend on this, the better it's going to look. And if you duplicate nodes, you can also make all of this a lot nicer. So I want to keep on adding more nodes, and this is a fairly boring task, so this is also going to be sped up. I guess this one is serviceable, so I am reasonably happy with that. Now we have a problem though, and that is that none of these have any kind of collision. And you could approach that in two ways. One would be to turn every single one of these sprites into a separate scene and then place them all again. That obviously is not what I'm going to do, that would take way too long. Instead, what you can do inside of these infestations, we can add a static body 2D. And for that, first of all, once again, you want to update the collision layers. This one should only be in the objects layer, and it can see the player, the enemies, and the projectiles. Now that we have that, I want to add a collision polygon 2D. This one is going to get a rough shape to block out one area, and you really don't have to be too precise for this sort of thing. The player would never notice. This would be one area. Now we can do all of that again and cover an area down there. Although for that, I want to get rid of this shape and then do something like this. One more time, and this static body area should cover this bit. Then I can duplicate it again, cover the other area. Copy it once again, this area now. And I think you get the idea. I'm going to do this corner and then ignore the other two parts because they're not terribly important. So this bit gets this area. All right. With that, we have most of the areas, and let's just say the player can walk on top of the other bits. So with that, we have inside of one node 2D a lot of extra decoration for this one part. Now, before we test all of this, I have to re-enable the lights and the player, or rather make all of this visible again. And now, if I go in, we are getting a lot of dark atmosphere, especially when I'm getting to the area at the bottom. You can see there we have some spooky stuff, and the collisions work perfectly fine. Also, all the way at the bottom, we should be having the crates, and they also work. Once we have enemies, this is going to get even better. But, well, with that, I think we have added a whole bunch of stuff. And I guess let me talk about really quick if I switch off the light. When you're creating some area like this, most of these little infestation sprites are so simple they don't really need their own scene. All you would do is create a static node, a sprite, and then a collision shape. But since this is so simple, you could just add them directly and then add the collision shape to the parent level. In this case, the inside level. Sometimes you might want to reuse them, and then having separate scenes might make sense, so this is totally fine. For the next part, we are going to start with the enemies.